Today, we dive into the heartbreaking tragedy of Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars, a story of loss, grief, and resilience behind the scenes of the famous show. What happened to Rick and his family will shock you, revealing a side of Pawn Stars no one expected. Let's get into it. While millions tune in to watch Pawn Stars, captivated by the dynamic between Rick Harrison and his son Corey, few knew about Rick's other son, Adam Harrison. Unlike his brother, Adam chose a life away from the cameras, maintaining a low profile that kept his personal battles hidden from the public eye. Adam's life was marked by a series of challenges, the most daunting being his struggle with substance abuse. Despite the family's efforts to support him, including multiple stints in rehabilitation, Adam found it difficult to overcome his addiction. Rick Harrison, in interviews, has expressed the pain of watching his son battle these demons, often feeling helpless despite his best efforts. The family's attempts to help Adam were numerous. Rick once shared that they even considered legal interventions, hoping that time in jail might serve as a turning point for Adam. However, these measures proved ineffective, and Adam's struggles continued. Adam's decision to stay out of the spotlight meant that many fans were unaware of his existence, let alone his battles. He had worked at the family's pawn shop before the show gained popularity, but chose not to be part of the television series. This separation from the public eye allowed him to live on his own terms, but also meant that his struggles remained largely unnoticed. The Harrison family's experience with Adam's addiction highlights the complexities of dealing with substance abuse, especially when it affects someone close. Rick's candid discussions about his son's challenges shed light on the emotional toll such situations take on families, emphasizing the importance of empathy and support for those facing similar battles. For Rick Harrison, the pain of watching his son Adam spiral into addiction was unlike anything he had ever faced. Known for being tough, quick-witted, and always in control on Pawn Stars, Rick was suddenly in a position where none of his business savvy or negotiating skills could save the person he cared about most. And it tore him apart. Behind the scenes, Rick exhausted every resource at his disposal to help Adam get clean. He enrolled him in multiple rehabilitation programs, sparing no expense and pulling every string he could to get Adam into reputable treatment centers. But as many families of addicts sadly know, recovery isn't something that can be forced, no matter how much money or love you pour into the effort. Rick's interventions went beyond rehab. He sought professional therapy and even tried tough love, hoping that consequences would spark change. According to Rick, at one point, the family even resorted to letting Adam spend time in jail, not out of punishment, but in the desperate hope that it would become a wake-up call. Unfortunately, that moment of clarity never came. Addiction had its claws too deep. Throughout all of this, Rick was battling his own sense of guilt and powerlessness. As a successful businessman and television personality, he's used to solving problems. But addiction doesn't work like a pawn shop deal. You can't negotiate with it. You can't make it go away with logic or a compelling argument. It's messy, emotional, and deeply personal. And that helplessness nearly broke him. Rick has since spoken about the emotional toll these years took on him. He would lie awake at night, wondering where Adam was, if he was safe, or if he'd get another call no parent ever wants to receive. And in the moments where Adam did try to clean up, Rick held his breath, afraid to hope too much and get hurt again. Despite all the darkness, Rick never gave up on Adam. Even when progress seemed impossible, the love of a father kept him pushing, trying, believing, even if just a little, that things could still turn around. It's a testament to the strength of family bonds and the pain that addiction inflicts not just on the individual, but on everyone who loves them. This chapter of Rick's life is one few viewers knew about while watching him crack jokes behind a pawn shop counter. But it's one that reveals a much deeper truth. Rick Harrison wasn't just a reality TV star. He was a father in crisis, doing everything he could to save his son from a silent, relentless enemy. But the hardest moment was still to come. It was a cold January morning in Las Vegas when everything changed. For Rick Harrison, January 19th, 2024, is a date that will be forever etched into his memory. Not as a business milestone or TV appearance, but as the day he lost his son. Adam Harrison was found unresponsive in a guest house in the city. At first, there were only whispers, quiet conversations, and uncertainty about what had happened. But when the official reports came in, they confirmed what Rick had feared for years. Adam had passed away from an accidental overdose. According to the Clark County Coroner's Office, the toxicology report revealed a deadly mix of fentanyl and methamphetamine in Adam's system. This wasn't a simple mistake or recreational misstep. It was a devastating result of a long, painful battle with addiction. And like far too many stories involving fentanyl, this one ended without a second chance. The news was a punch to the gut. For the public, it was a sad revelation about a person many never really knew. But for Rick, it was a moment every sleepless night, every anxious call, every visit to rehab, and every worried thought had been building toward. The moment no parent should ever have to face. In that instant, the persona of the confident, composed businessman crumbled. What remained was a heartbroken father grappling with a kind of grief that words can barely contain. The Harrison family released a statement asking for privacy, and for a time, Rick stepped back from the spotlight to process the unimaginable loss. Behind closed doors, the pain was raw and relentless. Rick later shared that there were no words to describe what it felt like to lose a child. "There's nothing worse than losing a kid," he said in one interview. "Nothing even comes close." He admitted to running through every scenario in his mind, asking himself what he could have done differently, what signs he might have missed, and whether there had been one last chance to save Adam that somehow slipped through his fingers. But the reality was cruel and unforgiving. Addiction doesn't always give second chances, and fentanyl in particular has become a silent killer, responsible for thousands of accidental deaths across the United States. It only takes a trace amount to end a life. In Adam's case, the mixture proved fatal. That day marked not only the loss of Rick's son, but also the end of a long and exhausting fight that the Harrison family had been waging in private. It pulled back the curtain on the realities of addiction, the dangers of synthetic opioids, and the personal cost of a crisis that's sweeping the country. But even in the shadow of that tragedy, Rick would find a way to speak up, to shine a light on the crisis that took his son, and try in some way to make sure that Adam's death wouldn't be in vain. And in the days that followed, Rick's grief turned into something unexpected. After Adam's passing, Rick Harrison could have stayed silent. He could have disappeared into his grief, kept his sorrow private, and continued on as a tough, no-nonsense character fans knew from television. But instead, he did something unexpected. He opened up. In the weeks and months after January 19th, Rick began speaking publicly about Adam's death, not for attention, not for sympathy, but because he knew that silence only made the problem worse. In interviews, Rick revealed the heavy emotional toll Adam's addiction had taken on the entire family, and how it changed the way he saw everything. One of the first things Rick said publicly was simple but devastating. "There's nothing worse than losing a kid. Nothing." The man who built an empire off clever deals and sharp instincts admitted he felt completely powerless when it came to saving his son. He explained how he had tried everything, from rehab to jail to tough love, and how, in the end, none of it had been enough. That honesty struck a chord with countless families facing similar battles. But Rick didn't stop at grief. He started talking about the growing danger of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid responsible for tens of thousands of deaths in recent years. He called it an epidemic and urged people to understand how lethal it really is. "You never think it'll happen to your family," he said in one appearance, "until it does." He spoke candidly about how easily a life can be lost. One pill, one bad mix, one night, that's all it took. Adam had intended to end his life, but the drugs he took didn't give him a second chance. And that, Rick explained, is what makes fentanyl so terrifying. It doesn't leave room for mistakes. In a particularly emotional interview, Rick shared that he still hears Adam's laugh in his head. He still walks past old photos and wonders what could have been. He still wakes up expecting a call or a message. That kind of loss doesn't go away. It just changes shape. What made Rick's response so powerful wasn't just a pain in his voice. It was a resolve. He wanted to make sure no other parent had to go through what he did. He began supporting awareness campaigns, reaching out to other grieving families, and lending his voice to the fight against fentanyl. The story of Adam Harrison was no longer just about tragedy. It was about awareness and about the urgent need for change. Rick turned personal heartbreak into public advocacy, not because he had to, but because he knew it might save someone else's life. But as Rick stepped back into the public eye, one question remained. How would the rest of the Harrison family cope with such a devastating loss? That answer, like so many parts of the story, was deeply human. The loss of Adam didn't just shatter Rick Harrison. It sent shockwaves through the entire Harrison family. Fans of Pawn Stars were used to seeing the close-knit dynamic between Rick, Corey, and the late Richard Old Man Harrison. But behind the scenes, Adam's passing exposed a layer of vulnerability the public had never seen before. For Corey Harrison, Rick's eldest and most visible son, the tragedy struck particularly deep. While Corey had long been in the spotlight alongside his father, Adam had taken a different path, choosing privacy over fame. But blood runs thicker than cameras, and Corey had his own bond with his brother. One built on childhood memories, shared laughter, and family dinners no one outside home ever saw. In a rare moment of openness, Corey addressed the tragedy on social media. He posted a throwback photo of him and Adam as kids, adding a simple caption, "I love you, little brother. I'll never forget you." It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real, honest, raw. Fans flooded the comments with support, and many were shocked to learn that Rick had another son at all. The tragedy had unearthed a piece of the Harrison family that had been kept out of the limelight, and with it, a deeper story than the one told on screen. For Jo and Rue Harrison, Rick's ex-wife and Adam's mother, the pain was beyond words. Though she kept a low profile throughout the years, friends close to the family said she was devastated by the loss. "A mother's grief is a quiet kind of suffering," one insider said. "She's trying to stay strong, but no one ever truly recovers from losing a child." The family came together in their own way. There were no televised memorials or attention-seeking moments, just a private funeral, shared tears, and a commitment to keep Adam's memory alive. According to those close to the Harrisons, Rick has since created a private foundation in Adam's name, dedicated to supporting addiction recovery services and raising awareness about the dangers of fentanyl and synthetic drugs. They also made sure Adam wasn't forgotten within the walls of the gold and silver pawn shop. While his face never appeared on the show, those who visited after his death noticed something new. A small memorial in a quiet corner of the store. Just a few photos, a candle, a plaque that read, "Forever loved, never forgotten." Fans who saw it were moved. Many said gave them a new perspective on the Harrisons, not just as TV personalities, but as real people carrying real pain. It reminded viewers that behind every public figure is a private story, often far more painful than anyone can imagine. The tragedy also brought the family closer. Rick and Corey, despite their frequent on-screen banter and disagreements, found renewed strength in one another. "You hold tighter to the people you still have," Rick later said, "because you never know when it'll be the last time." But the Harrison family's pain wasn't just personal. It was now part of a much larger national conversation. Adam Harrison's death wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a much darker, far-reaching epidemic that's been sweeping across America with deadly force. Fentanyl, once a medical solution for extreme pain, has now become one of the most dangerous street drugs on the planet. And Rick Harrison's story, as heartbreaking as it is just one of tens of thousands. Fentanyl is up to 50 times more potent than heroin. And that's not just a statistic. It's the reason why a single dose can end a life before someone even realizes what they've taken. Dealers often mix fentanyl with other substances to increase potency and profit, but the result is a game of Russian roulette. Most victims, like Adam, don't even know it's in the mix until it's too late. In 2023 alone, over 100,000 Americans lost their lives to drug overdoses, nearly 70% of them involving synthetic opioids like fentanyl. That's more than car crashes, gun violence, or even some wars. And yet, for many people, this crisis still feels distant until it hits their family. Rick Harrison has since used his platform to draw attention to the epidemic. He's spoken out against the ease with which these drugs are entering the country, calling it a national security failure. "We're losing an entire generation," he said during one interview. "This isn't just about addicts. It's about sons and daughters, families being ripped apart in silence." He's not wrong. The stories mirror each other across the country, promising young lives, some experimenting, others self-medicating pain, ending in a sudden, silent death. And it's not just in back alleys or dangerous neighborhoods. It's in suburbs, in small towns, in places that once felt untouched by this kind of devastation. One of the cruelest aspects of the fentanyl crisis is how quiet it is. There's often no time for intervention, no overdose note, no goodbye, just silence. Families go from worrying to mourning in the space of a phone call. That's exactly what happened to Rick. The Harrison family's loss has put a recognizable face on an invisible war. And while it's difficult to talk about, Rick believes it's necessary. By telling Adam's story, he hopes to help others recognize the signs, understand the risks, and avoid the same fate. Because fentanyl doesn't care about fame, money, or how much your family loves you. It doesn't care if you relapse once or never before. All it takes is one dose. But Rick's message wasn't just about the dangers of the drug. It was about the silence surrounding it, the lack of awareness, the shame that keeps families from talking about it until it's too late. And what he said next caught even his most loyal fans by surprise. Rick Harrison has never been one to stay quiet when something doesn't sit right with him. And after Adam's death, his grief quickly turned into something sharper, anger, not just at addiction, not just at fentanyl, but at the system that allowed it to spiral so far out of control. In multiple interviews following the tragedy, Rick shifted his focus from personal loss to public accountability. He began calling out what he described as a complete breakdown of national responsibility. This isn't just a drug problem, he said. It's a border problem. It's a political problem. And it's a failure on every level. Rick pointed the finger directly at U.S. policymakers, claiming that the country's porous southern border had become the main entry point for illicit fentanyl. He accused both Democratic and Republican leaders of ignoring the growing death toll while engaging in endless political gridlock. They fight over everything except the one thing that's actually killing people, he said. It's insane. According to federal data, most of the illicit fentanyl in the U.S. is manufactured overseas and smuggled through border crossings, often in tiny amounts that are nearly impossible to detect. A few milligrams can kill, and traffickers know it. Rick didn't mince words. This SHD is being pumped into our country like poison, and nobody's stopping it. Some criticized his stance as overly political. Others applauded him for saying what many grieving families were thinking, but didn't have the platform to express. Either way, Rick doubled down. He wasn't interested in polite conversations anymore. He had buried his son. He had nothing left to lose. But it wasn't just the government he called out. Rick also criticized pharmaceutical companies for fueling the opioid crisis in the first place. We create a culture that treats pain like a defect, he said. Now we're shocked that people turn to stronger stuff when the pills run out. He argued that years of overprescription and corporate greed set the stage for the fentanyl wave. First came the painkillers, then came the withdrawals, and then came the street alternatives that promised relief but delivered death. It was a chain reaction, and Adam had gotten caught in the middle of it. Rick's message wasn't polished. It wasn't PR friendly. It was raw, emotional, and sometimes brutally honest. But it resonated. Other families started reaching out. Fans who had lost loved ones to fentanyl began sharing their stories. What started as Rick's tragedy began sparking a wider conversation. And through it all, Rick carried a powerful belief. If more people spoke out, fewer people might die. We got to stop treating this like a moral failure, he said. It's a public health disaster. And if we keep sweeping it under the rug, more families are going to be planning funerals instead of graduations. But while Rick raged against the system, he also wrestled with something far more personal. Guilt. Could he have done more? Could anyone? And that inner conflict would haunt him in ways no camera could ever capture. Rick Harrison has faced tough negotiations, legal battles, and the pressure of running a multi-million-dollar business under the watchful eye of millions. But nothing could have prepared him for quiet, crushing weight of guilt. After Adam's death, Rick admitted he couldn't stop replaying the past. Every phone call he missed, every conversation he cut short, every argument, every silence, every moment that might have made a difference. That's the thing about survivor's guilt. It doesn't care how much you did. It only asks what more you could have done. In one particularly emotional moment, Rick told a close friend, "I keep thinking, what if I had just called him that day? What if I had been there?" Those thoughts don't go away. They loop, endlessly, no matter how many people tell you it wasn't your fault. Behind the scenes, Rick was reportedly a wreck. Friends said he barely spoke for days at a time. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. And for a while, even walking into the gold and silver pawn shop, the empire he built felt like a betrayal. How could he smile on camera or haggle over antiques when his son was gone? He started distancing himself from the spotlight. Public appearances were canceled. Filming for Pawn Stars quietly paused. Fans noticed, but few knew the real reason why. Rick wasn't just grieving. He was unraveling. For a man used to being in control, that was perhaps the hardest part. He couldn't fix this. He couldn't bring Adam back. And no amount of success could shield him from the reality that he had lost one of the most important people in his life. In private, Rick started writing down his memories of Adam. It wasn't for a book. It wasn't for the show. It was just for him, a way to remember the laughter. The time they fixed up a beat-up old bike together. The first time Adam beat him at chess. Little things that hurt to recall, but hurt even more to forget. Friends say Rick has become more introspective since the tragedy, more emotional, less concerned with material success. He's even hinted that he's rethinking his long-term plans for the business. When something like this happens, he once said, you realize that all the stuff you built, it means nothing if the people you love aren't there to share it with you. He's also become more protective of his remaining family. His bond with Corey deepened. Their usual on-screen sarcasm took on a new tone, still playful, but now laced with unspoken understanding. They've been through something together that changed them both forever. Rick's story isn't one of perfect fatherhood or easy redemption. It's messy, it's painful, and it's real. But in the middle of that pain, he's found something else, clarity. A raw, painful truth about what really matters. And it was that truth that would inspire Rick to start building something new, something that could outlast even the legacy of Pawn Stars. Grief as a way of hollowing people out, or turn them into something stronger. For Rick Harrison, the pain of losing Adam didn't just linger. It started to shape everything he did. And in that pain, something new began to take root, purpose. It started small. Quiet donations to addiction recovery programs. Private conversations with families going through the same nightmare. Then came the decision to do more, to speak out, to fight back, and to make sure Adam's name wouldn't be remembered just as another statistic. Rick launched a private initiative focused on fentanyl awareness and addiction support, though he kept it mostly out of the public eye at first. Insiders say the project was deeply personal. It wasn't about building a brand. It was about saving lives. If I can stop even one kid from going through what Adam did, he reportedly told a friend, then maybe some of this pain starts to make sense. The initiative quickly grew. Rick began working with grassroots organizations, speaking at events, and helping to fund treatment centers. He pushed for better education in schools about the real dangers of fentanyl. Not the scare tactics of the past, but honest, fact-based awareness. He emphasized that addiction isn't weakness. It's a disease, one that kills quietly and quickly. And unlike so many celebrity campaigns, Rick didn't just slap his name on a cause and move on. He showed up, in person. He sat with grieving parents. He hugged kids in recovery. He listened to the stories, the ones that sounded all too much like Adam's. What shocked people most wasn't just Rick's sincerity. It was how deeply he'd changed. Gone was the purely business-driven personality people saw on Pawn Stars. In his place was a man still haunted by loss, but driven to make that loss mean something. And then came one of his boldest moves yet. Rick began advocating for changes in policy. He called for tighter border control, not out of politics, but out of desperation. He demanded more federal funding for addiction treatment, tougher penalties for fentanyl traffickers, and better support for families of overdose victims. His message was clear. This isn't someone else's problem. This is everyone's problem. He started appearing on panels, podcasts, and even news segments, not to promote the shop, but to share Adam's story. And every time, you could see the weight in his eyes. This wasn't a media tour. This was a mission. But Rick didn't stop there. He also created a scholarship fund in Adam's name, offering financial support for young people in recovery trying to rebuild their lives. Addiction takes everything, Rick said. But hope? That's something we can give back. What Rick has built in the wake of tragedy is something few could have predicted. He turned personal heartbreak into public action. He took one of the darkest moments of his life and used it to shine a light on a crisis too many still ignore. But even as Rick pushed forward, the memory of Adam stayed with him. Every day, every decision, every step. Rick Harrison's story isn't just about a famous pawn shop or a popular TV show. It's about the profound ways tragedy reshapes us. The loss of Adam cast a long shadow over the Pawn Stars empire, but also brought into focus what really matters: family, healing, and hope. Since Adam's passing, the show has continued, but fans notice a subtle shift. The on-screen banter between Rick and Corey carries a different weight, sometimes quieter, sometimes more heartfelt. There's an unspoken respect for the pain beneath the jokes. The Harrisons have learned that life isn't just about deals and antiques. It's about holding on to what matters most. Rick has become more than just a TV personality. He's a voice for those too often forgotten. His mission to raise awareness about fentanyl and addiction reaches beyond the bright lights and cameras. It's a mission born from loss, but aimed at saving lives. The memorial inside the gold and silver pawn shop stands as a quiet reminder of Adam's life and the family's grief. It's a place where visitors pause, reflect, and remember that behind every face on TV is a story, sometimes joyful, sometimes heartbreaking. For Rick, Corey, and the rest of the family, Adam's story is a daily reality. It's in the choices they make, the conversations they have, and the legacy they hope to leave behind. They've shown resilience in the face of overwhelming pain, proving that even when tragedy strikes, there is strength to be found. Rick's journey teaches us something vital. Fame can't shield us from loss, but can be used to make a difference. By sharing his story, Rick has helped put a human face on the fentanyl crisis, a crisis that too many ignore until it hits home. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all is this: even in the darkest moments, love endures. Adam may be gone, but his memory fuels a fight for change. It reminds us that every life lost addiction is a call to action, a reason to keep pushing, keep speaking, and keep hoping. Rick Harrison's heartbreak is real. His pain is palpable. But through it all, he's found purpose. And in that purpose lies a legacy far greater than any pawn shop, one that could save lives and change the course of a nation. Thanks for watching and taking a moment to understand the heartbreaking tragedy of Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives like this. Until next time, stay curious and take care.